So many people among the supporters of the former President Donald Trump have suggested that Hillary Clinton engaged in insurrection in 2016 for questioning the fairness of the election and saying things like this.
I believe he knows he's an illegitimate president. He knows that there were a bunch of different reasons why the election turned out the way it did.
Next week, with the Supreme Court set to hear oral argument on whether or not Trump can remain on the ballot in certain states that have had him removed for his role in January 6, 2021, it's almost certain that this issue is going to arise again. Now, the concept of do unto others as you would have done unto you isn't just something that's in Judeo-Christian texts. It's also baked into our constitutional system in the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. So while Hillary Clinton did concede in the 2016 election on election night,
last night I congratulated Donald Trump and offered to work with him on behalf of our country.
it is still fair to compare and contrast the statements that she made in the aftermath of 2016 against the criminal and civil allegations of the former president for what he said in the wake of the 2020 election. It is even fair to ask ourselves, what would we think or what would we feel if Hillary Clinton had done what it is both criminally and civilly alleged that Donald Trump had done in the wake of 2020? For that, we're going to utilize the assistance of AI, and we're going to take you back to November 8th, 2016, while conservatives were drinking in the sweet nectar of liberal tears. Now, instead of conceding on election night in 2016, Hillary Clinton waited. We're going to close our eyes and we're going to assume that she waited to the following day, and she released a statement like this.
My fellow Americans, this election is a result of fraud, and it is far from over. We are aware of Russian troll farms that influence the outcome of the election through a planned program of deception and misinformation. Additionally, our campaign recently uncovered that Mr. Trump paid hush money to two women in violation of campaign finance laws in order to hide these affairs from the voters. This is in addition to our own Department of Justice through Director James Comey, who chose to reveal misleading and defamatory information about me mere days before voters went to the polls. Ladies and gentlemen, I intend to fight the results of this sham election not just for my supporters but for all of the American people who deserve free and fair elections. This is not over.
So we're going to assume that she assembled a team of lawyers who filed north of 50 lawsuits in the states where the margin was close enough to influence the 2016 outcome. We are going to assume that not only were all of these cases dismissed, but some of her attorneys were actually sanctioned, some facing disbarment for bringing frivolous evidence to support the claims of election fraud. We are also going to assume for these purposes that these legal challenges culminated when, after she had gotten some of her Senate colleagues to file a lawsuit in the Supreme Court refused to entertain it. Now, after her failure to concede on election night and all of the failed legal challenges, you might feel her conduct in this particular hypothetical was classless. You might think that she just could not come to terms with an election loss. But did her conduct in this hypothetical scenario rise to the level of criminality? And the answer to that question is no. Similarly, in President Trump's election subversion case, the special prosecutor Jack Smith said as much in the D.C. indictment. Indeed, Jack Smith says that legal challenges to an election loss are perfectly above board and the right of any candidate in an election. Now, in this hypothetical, it's not a direct one-for-one. Hillary Clinton or her surrogates had defamed election workers or corporations, ordered to pay significant sums of money for defamatory conduct, but you get the point. So we must go further, right? So in this hypothetical scenario, we're also going to assume that she ignored President Obama's security chief when he called it a fair election and sought to have him fired. We're also going to assume that she ignored then Attorney General Loretta Lynch when she said that Hillary Clinton's election claims were not not true?
I told him that the stuff that his people were shoveling out to the public was bullshit. I mean,
No harm. All right, what he said. So in our hypothetical, you still have your eyes closed, right? You're going to assume that Hillary Clinton, even after her unsuccessful legal challenges, still planned to challenge the certification, the process for states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, states that she lost by a closer margin. So in this hypothetical, she contacts her fellow Democrat and then Secretary of State for the state of Pennsylvania, Pedro Cortez, in which she says things like this.
I just want to find 44,000 and 293 votes, which is one more than we need.
And like this.
There's nothing wrong with saying you recalculated.
Now, this should be friendly territory, right? She's berating a fellow Democrat and supporter about her claims of election fraud, and it did not go her way. Then I want you to assume that she leans on her former Senate colleague, Joe Biden, who had the ceremonial role of counting the electoral votes on January 6th, and asks him to decline to certify the results and send them back to the states. Then I want you to imagine that then President Biden refused to go along with this plan because he didn't think that he was constitutionally able to reject the certifications from the states. Then I want you to assume that she proceeded to barrage him with a series of tweets where she essentially accused him of being complicit in her election loss. I want you to assume during this period of time, she's also promoting a rally on the day where you're constitutionally to count these votes, January 6th, where she asks her supporters to be there and promises that it will be wild. I want you to assume for this hypothetical that there are paramilitary groups that are hypothetical too, like the Proud Girls or the Constitutional Keepers, and they took her tweets as a call to arms. I want you to assume in this hypothetical that she did host a rally where she called on her supporters to fight or they would not have a country left to fight for. I want you to assume, for the sake of fairness, that she interspersed that with occasional calls for civility and peace, but she also had supporters at that rally who called for trial by combat. Now, for this hypothetical, I want you to assume that after the rally and a planned march on the Capitol, some of her supporters decided that they were going to breach the Capitol doors. Some of them may have been allowed in, but ultimately they caused millions in damage, injured Capitol Police, and were successful in delaying the vote count. I also want you to assume that during this period, Hillary Clinton sat watching these incidents happen on television. During this time, we're also going to assume that some of her supporters had gathered outside of the Capitol and were calling for the summary execution of the Vice President of the United States. We're also going to assume that they may have built fake gallows. We're also going to assume some of her staffers testified that she privately expressed at least a lukewarm sentiment to the idea that the Vice President would be executed. Now,
they're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, "You heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong."
I also want you to assume in the aftermath of the 2016 election, in 2016 and early 2017, she had a plan between her and her supporters to send a group of fake electors that would ultimately challenge the validity of the certified count. Now, I want you to assume that the purpose in having Hillary Clinton supporters descend on the Capitol to ultimately delay the certification count was for this fake elector scheme to take hold. Now the hypothetical is over. You can open your eyes. Now tell me, in the event that Hillary Clinton had engaged in what Donald Trump is alleged to have engaged in, would you defend her? And if not, why not? If, on the other hand, this hypothetical scenario would cause you to call Hillary Clinton a traitor, a wannabe dictator, an authoritarian, or in this case, an insurrectionist, maybe now you have some perspective on why these allegations are being brought against the former president Donald Trump and why he was criminally indicted. Additionally, you may have some insight as to why, under the 14th Amendment, states are trying to remove him from the ballot. Just some food for thought.